The flames were licking up the side of the stagecoach when Victoria Sinclair realized she was going to die on this dusty Montana road, and the irony was not lost on her that she had survived Boston society only to perish in the wilderness she had been so eager to embrace. It was August 1878, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the rutted trail between Helena and what was supposed to be her new home in Utica, a mining town nestled in the mountains where her aunt had promised her a fresh start away from the suffocating expectations of Eastern life. Victoria was 22 years old, unmarried by choice rather than circumstance, and she had burned every bridge behind her to come west. Now she was simply burning. The accident had happened so fast. One moment the stage was rattling along, the driver cursing the horses as they struggled up a steep incline. The next, a wheel had struck a rock, the axle had splintered with a crack like gunfire, and the whole contraption had lurched sideways. The oil lamp that hung inside had shattered, and within seconds the dry wood of the coach was ablaze. The driver and the guard had been thrown clear, landing hard on the trail. Victoria had been trapped inside, her skirts tangled in the seat, her carpet bag wedged against the door. She could hear shouting outside, could smell the acrid smoke filling her lungs, could feel the heat growing more intense with each passing second. Her hands were shaking as she tried to free herself, but the more she struggled, the tighter her skirts seemed to bind her. Panic clawed at her throat. The window on the upward side of the tilted coach was her only hope. But it was too high, too far, and the smoke was making her dizzy. Then, a shadow blocked the light from the window. A face appeared, angular and weathered, with intense green eyes that locked onto hers with an expression of pure determination. The man did not ask if she needed help or waste time with pleasantries. He simply thrust his arm through the window, reached down and grabbed her wrist with a grip like iron. "Take my other hand," he commanded, his voice rough but steady. Victoria stretched upward, coughing, her eyes streaming. Her fingers found his other hand, and his grip tightened. Without hesitation, he pulled. She felt her skirts rip, felt herself being dragged upward with a strength that seemed impossible. The window frame scraped her shoulders, caught on her bodice, but he kept pulling, his muscles straining, his jaw set with fierce concentration. "Almost there," he growled. "Do not let go." She would not have been able to let go even if she wanted to. His hands were locked around her wrists like manacles, and he was hauling her up as if she weighed nothing at all. With one final heave, he pulled her through the window and into his arms. He did not pause to set her down gently. Instead, he turned and ran, carrying her away from the burning stagecoach with long, powerful strides. They had barely cleared 20 yards when the coach exploded in a burst of flame and smoke. The horses, already cut free by the driver, whinnied and bolted. Victoria felt the heat wash over them even at that distance, felt the man's arms tighten around her protectively, shielding her body with his own. When he finally set her down, her legs would not hold her. She collapsed onto the dirt, coughing and gasping, her whole body shaking with shock and relief. The man knelt beside her, one large hand on her back, steadying her. "Breathe slowly," he said. "You are safe now." Victoria tried to speak, but her throat was raw. She looked up at her rescuer properly for the first time. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and arms thick with muscle. His hair was dark brown, long enough to brush his collar, and his face was all hard planes and sharp angles beneath several days' worth of beard. He wore buckskin trousers and a leather vest over a rough cotton shirt, and there was a knife sheathed at his belt. He looked like he had walked straight out of one of the dime novels she had secretly read back in Boston, except he was real, and he had just saved her life. "Thank you," she managed to croak out. He studied her face for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You are hurt?" "I do not think so, just shaken." "You're lucky. That coach went up like kindling." The driver came limping over, his face pale beneath the dust. "Miss, I'm so sorry. I do not know what happened. The wheel just gave out. Are you all right?" "I'm alive, thanks to this man." Victoria looked back at her rescuer. "I do not even know your name." "Isaac Rowland," he said simply. "Victoria Sinclair." She tried to stand, and he rose with her, one hand hovering near her elbow in case she faltered. "I owe you my life, Mr. Rowland." "No debt," he said, his tone making it clear the matter was closed. He turned to the driver. "Your guard has a broken arm. The coach is a total loss. Where were you headed?" "Utica. This lady was going to stay with her aunt there. Isaac's eyes flicked back to Victoria. Utica is still 15 miles north. You cannot walk it in those shoes, and your horses are halfway to Canada by now. What do we do? The driver asked, sounding lost. My camp is 2 miles west, up in the foothills. I have supplies and horses. We go there, I get you sorted out, and tomorrow I will take Miss Sinclair to Utica myself. Victoria found her voice. That is very generous, but I could not impose on you any further. Isaac's green eyes met hers, and there was something in them that made her breath catch. Miss Sinclair, you have no food, no water, no shelter, and it will be dark in 3 hours. The nights are cold in these mountains, and there are wolves. You are not imposing. You are surviving. So we go to my camp. He said it with such absolute certainty that Victoria found herself nodding. The driver looked relieved, and the guard, who was indeed cradling his arm, nodded gratefully. Isaac went to retrieve something from the wreckage, returning with Victoria's singed carpet bag, one of the few items that had been thrown clear. Can you walk? He asked her. Yes, I think so. Then we start now. Stay close and watch your footing. This terrain is unforgiving. Isaac set a steady pace, leading them away from the smoking ruins of the stagecoach and into the wilderness. Victoria's shoes, delicate things meant for city streets, were utterly inadequate for the rocky ground, but she bit her lip and kept going. She would not complain, not after everything Isaac had done for her. The foothills rose around them, covered in pine trees and scrub brush. The air was cleaner here, away from the smoke, and Victoria's lungs began to clear. She watched Isaac as he walked ahead of them, his movements efficient and sure. He navigated the rough terrain as if it were a city sidewalk, never hesitating, always seeming to know exactly where to place his feet. There was something almost primal about him, a kind of raw competence that Victoria had never encountered in the civilized men of Boston. Those men knew how to tie a cravat and discuss philosophy, but they would have been utterly helpless out here. Isaac, on the other hand, seemed perfectly at home. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only an hour, they emerged into a small clearing. A lean-to shelter stood against a rock face, and a fire pit ringed with stones sat in the center of the space. 3 horses were tethered nearby, grazing peacefully. It was a simple camp, but it was clean and well organized, the camp of someone who knew how to live in the wilderness. Sit, Isaac said, gesturing to a log near the fire pit. He set about building a fire with quick, practiced movements. Within minutes, flames were crackling, and he was heating water in a battered tin pot. He tended to the guard's arm first, fashioning a splint from branches and strips of cloth, his hands surprisingly gentle for their size. Then he handed Victoria a cup of water. Drink slowly, he instructed. Your throat needs time to heal. She obeyed, grateful for the cool water. As the sun began to set, Isaac produced supplies from his shelter, dried meat, hardtack, and some kind of root vegetable that he roasted in the coals. It was simple fare, but Victoria had never tasted anything better. The driver and guard ate ravenously, then stretched out near the fire, exhausted. Isaac sat down across from Victoria, his eyes reflecting the firelight. Your aunt in Utica, she's expecting you? Yes. Her name is Margaret Chambers. She's a widow. Her husband owned a store, and she runs it now. I know the place. Good woman, Margaret. You know her? I come through Utica every few months to trade furs and buy supplies. Small town. Everyone knows everyone. What do you do out here, Mr. Rowland? Trap mostly. Hunt. I have a cabin further up in the mountains. I prefer it up there. You live alone? I do. Victoria studied him in the firelight. There was a story there, she could tell, a reason why a man would choose complete solitude over human company. But it was not her place to pry, not on the first day she met him. How did you happen to be on that road today? She asked instead. I was heading to Helena to sell pelts, saw the smoke from the ridge, came to see what was burning. He paused. I'm glad I did. So am I, Mr. Rowland, so am I. Isaac, he said, out here we do not stand much on formality. Then you must call me Victoria. He nodded, and something passed between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of connection that went beyond gratitude. Victoria felt it in her chest, a flutter of something she could not quite name. She told herself it was just the aftermath of the accident, the natural bond between a person and their rescuer. But when Isaac's eyes met hers across the fire, she was not entirely convinced. The night grew colder, and Isaac produced blankets from his shelter, distributing them to his unexpected guests. He gave Victoria the thickest one, and when she protested, he simply said, "You need it more," in a tone that brooked no argument. She wrapped herself in the blanket and lay down near the fire, exhausted beyond measure. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Isaac, sitting upright, keeping watch over the camp, his profile strong and steady against the starlit sky. Morning came with the smell of coffee, real coffee, and Victoria woke to find Isaac already up and moving. He had somehow procured eggs, which he was frying in a pan over the fire. "Where did you get eggs?" she asked, sitting up and wincing at the soreness in her muscles. "I have an arrangement with a ranch about 5 miles south, trade meat for other supplies." He handed her a tin plate with eggs and more of the hardtack, softened in the pan drippings. It was a rough breakfast by Boston standards, but Victoria ate every bite. After they had eaten, Isaac saddled 2 of his horses. "Driver, you and the guard take the brown mare and head back to Helena. There's a doctor there who can set that arm properly. Tell the stage company what happened." "What about you?" the driver asked. "I will take Miss Sinclair to Utica on the sorrel. My gray will carry my gear." "Are you sure? That's a long way out of your way." "I'm sure." There was no point arguing with Isaac, Victoria was beginning to realize. When he decided something, it was decided. The driver and guard departed with many thanks, and then it was just the 2 of them in the clearing. Isaac turned to Victoria. "Have you ridden before?" "Not often, and never astride." "You will ride in front of me. I will hold you secure. It is the safest way." Victoria felt her cheeks warm at the thought of being held against him for hours, but there was no other option. She nodded, and Isaac lifted her onto the horse as easily as if she were a child. He swung up behind her, and his arms came around her to hold the reins. She was enveloped by his presence, his chest solid against her back, his arms bracketing her on either side. "Comfortable?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. "Yes," she managed to say, though comfortable was not exactly the word she would have chosen. Acutely aware was more accurate. They set off at an easy pace, the horse picking its way through the foothills. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, and Victoria found herself relaxing into Isaac's hold. He radiated heat and strength, and despite the strangeness of the situation, she felt utterly safe. "Tell me about Boston," Isaac said after they had been riding for a while. "What would you like to know?" "Why you left." Victoria was silent for a moment. "I was expected to marry a man I did not love. A banker, very respectable, very dull. My parents had arranged everything, but I could not do it. I wanted something more than a life of tea parties and social calls and pretending to be happy. My aunt wrote to me, said I could come stay with her, help her with the store. So I took what money I had saved and bought a ticket west. That took courage, or foolishness. I've been lectured many times on the difference. There is no difference. Courage always looks like foolishness to people who have none of it themselves." Victoria turned her head slightly, trying to see his face. "Is that why you live in the mountains? Because you wanted something more?" Isaac was quiet for so long that she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "I was a soldier, fought in the Indian Wars, saw things, did things that I would rather forget. When my enlistment was up, I came here. The mountains do not judge. They do not demand anything but respect. That suits me. Do you ever get lonely?" "Sometimes. But I prefer loneliness to bad company." "And what about good company?" She felt his chest move as he breathed. "Good company is rare, worth holding on to when you find it." They rode on, the conversation fading into comfortable silence. Victoria watched the landscape change around them, the foothills giving way to gentler terrain, the pine forests thinning to reveal meadows dotted with wildflowers. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache, so different from the manicured parks of Boston. Around midday, Isaac stopped at a stream to let the horses drink and rest. He helped Victoria down, and she walked stiffly to the water's edge, splashing the cool liquid on her face. Her dress was ruined, torn and smoke-stained, and her hair had come loose from its pins hanging in tangles down her back. She must look like a disaster, but Isaac had not said a word about it. Here, he said, appearing beside her with something in his hand. It was a comb carved from bone. For your hair. Thank you. She took it, touched by the gesture. She sat on a rock and began working through the tangles, wincing when the comb caught on a particularly stubborn knot. Let me, Isaac said. Before she could protest, he was standing behind her, taking the comb from her hand. His fingers were careful as he worked through her hair, starting at the ends and gradually moving higher. It was strangely intimate, and Victoria found herself holding very still, barely breathing. You have beautiful hair, he said quietly, like honey in sunlight. Victoria's heart skipped. Thank you, she whispered. When her hair was smooth, he handed her the comb back, and for a moment their fingers touched. Victoria looked up at him, and the expression in his eyes made her forget how to breathe. There was something there, something intense and undeniable, and she knew he felt it too, this pull between them. We should keep moving, Isaac said, his voice rougher than before. We can reach Utica before dark if we do not delay. They rode through the afternoon, and with each mile, Victoria felt a growing sense of reluctance. She was grateful to be going to her aunt, of course, but part of her wanted this journey to last longer, wanted more time with this quiet, strong man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. As the sun began its descent, the town of Utica came into view, nestled in a valley with mountains rising on all sides. It was small, just a single main street lined with wooden buildings, but it looked prosperous and well kept. Isaac guided the horse down the main thoroughfare, and people stopped to stare at them. Victoria supposed they made quite a sight, her in her ruined dress, him in his buckskins, riding together. Isaac stopped in front of a tidy store with a sign that read, Chambers General Store. Before Victoria could dismount, the door flew open, and a woman rushed out. Victoria, oh, my dear girl, you are here. Margaret Chambers was a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair. She hurried over, her face breaking into a wide smile that faltered when she got a good look at Victoria. Good Lord, child, what happened to you? There was an accident, Aunt Margaret. The stagecoach caught fire. This is Isaac Rowland. He saved my life and brought me here. Margaret's eyes widened as she looked up at Isaac. Isaac Rowland, I should have known. Always turning up when someone needs help. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Isaac dismounted and helped Victoria down, his hands steady on her waist. She is safe. That is what matters. Margaret ushered them inside, where she immediately set about making tea and fussing over Victoria. The store was warm and cluttered, filled with everything from dry goods to mining equipment. Stairs at the back led up to the living quarters above. You must stay for supper, Mr. Rowland, Margaret insisted. It is the least I can do. I do not want to intrude. Nonsense. You saved my niece. You will stay. Isaac glanced at Victoria, and she nodded. Please stay. All right. Thank you. Margaret sent Victoria upstairs to wash and change while she prepared the meal. Victoria stood in the small bedroom that was to be hers, looking at herself in the mirror. Her face was smudged with soot, her eyes bright in a way they had not been in years. She looked alive, truly alive, for the first time since she could remember. She washed carefully, scrubbing away the grime, and changed into a clean dress from her carpet bag, a simple blue cotton that was much more practical than what she'd been wearing. When she came back downstairs, Isaac was sitting at the table, looking somewhat uncomfortable indoors. He had washed too, and his dark hair was wet, slicked back from his face. He stood when she entered, and his eyes traveled over her. You look recovered. I feel much better, thank you. Supper was venison stew and fresh bread, and Margaret kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling Victoria about the town and the people in it. Isaac ate quietly, answering when spoken to, but offering little else. Victoria found herself watching him, noticing the way his shoulders filled out his shirt, the way his hands handled the spoon with surprising delicacy. After the meal, Margaret insisted that Isaac take some supplies for his trouble. I will not hear any argument. You take what you need. Isaac selected a few basic items, nothing extravagant, and thanked her. Then he turned to Victoria. I am glad you are safe, Miss Sinclair. Victoria, she corrected, and I still owe you everything. You owe me nothing. He hesitated, then added, if you need anything while you are here, word can reach me. Margaret knows how. Thank you, Isaac. For everything. He nodded, and for a moment she thought he would say something more, but then he simply touched the brim of his hat and walked out. Victoria stood in the doorway, watching him mount his horse and ride out of town, leading his pack horse behind him. She felt an ache in her chest, a sense of something ending before it had properly begun. "He is a good man," Margaret said softly, coming to stand beside her. "Keeps to himself mostly, but when someone needs help, he's always there. You could do worse, my dear." Victoria felt her cheeks flush. "Aunt Margaret, I only just met him." "Sometimes that is all it takes. I knew I would marry Thomas Chambers 5 minutes after I met him. We had 30 good years together before he passed. Do not waste time when your heart speaks, Victoria. Life is too short." Victoria did not respond, but her aunt's words stayed with her as she helped clean up and prepared for bed. That night, lying in her new room, she thought about Isaac, about his strong hands pulling her from the fire, about the way he had held her on the horse, steady and sure, about the look in his eyes when he had combed her hair. She told herself it was foolish. He was a mountain man, a trapper who lived in isolation. She was a city girl, trying to start a new life in a small town. They had nothing in common except one dramatic day. But her heart would not listen to logic, and when she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of green eyes and gentle hands. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Victoria threw herself into helping her aunt with the store, learning the inventory, serving customers, keeping the books. She was good at it, and she enjoyed the work, enjoyed feeling useful. The people of Utica were welcoming, curious about the newcomer, but kind. She made friends with the schoolteacher, a woman named Sarah who was close to her own age and began to feel like she might actually belong here. But she could not stop thinking about Isaac. Every time the door to the store opened, her heart would leap, hoping to see him. But he did not come. Margaret said it was normal, that he sometimes stayed in the mountains for months at a time, but Victoria could not help feeling disappointed. One afternoon in early September, Victoria was restocking shelves when she heard a commotion outside. She went to the window and saw a group of men gathered in the street talking excitedly. "What's going on?" she asked Sarah, who had come in to buy some thread. "Sounds like there's trouble up at the Fletcher mine. A collapse or something. They are organizing a rescue party." Victoria's stomach clenched. "Is anyone hurt?" "They think there are men trapped. The mine owner is asking for anyone with experience to help." The door opened and Victoria's breath caught. Isaac walked in, his expression grim. He went straight to Margaret. "I need rope, lanterns, and whatever medical supplies you have. The Fletcher mine has partially collapsed. There are at least 6 men trapped inside." Margaret did not hesitate. "Victoria, help me gather what he needs." They worked quickly, piling supplies on the counter. Isaac's eyes met Victoria's briefly, and she saw the determination there. "Be careful," she said softly. "Always am." He paid, gathered the supplies, and was gone. Victoria spent the rest of the day in a state of anxiety, unable to focus on anything. By evening, word came that the rescue party had gotten 4 men out, but 2 were still trapped deeper in the mine, and the passages were unstable. It was too dangerous to go further. Isaac had gone in anyway. Victoria could not stand it. She left the store despite her aunt's protests and walked to the mine, which was on the edge of town. A crowd had gathered, miners' wives clutching their children, men with worried faces standing around a makeshift camp. The mine entrance was lit by torches, and every few minutes someone would emerge with an update. "Rowland is still in there," one man said. "Crazy fool. The whole thing could come down on him." "If anyone can get them out, it is him," another replied. "He knows caves better than anyone in these mountains." Victoria waited with the others, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Hours passed. The night grew cold. She refused to leave. Finally, near midnight, there was a shout. Men appeared at the mine entrance carrying someone on a makeshift stretcher, then another. And then Isaac emerged, covered in dust, supporting a third man who was limping badly. The crowd erupted in cheers. Victoria pushed forward, desperate to see him, to make sure he was all right. He was handing off the injured man to the town doctor when she reached him. "Isaac." He turned, and his face registered surprise. "Victoria, what are you doing here?" "I was worried about you." Something flickered in his eyes. "I'm fine, just some bruises. You could have been killed. But I was not. He swayed slightly, and she realized he was exhausted. "Come back to the store. You need rest and food." "I should get back to my camp." "Isaac Rowland, you are not riding anywhere tonight. You can barely stand. Please." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right." She led him back through the dark streets, acutely aware of his presence beside her. Margaret was waiting, and she took one look at Isaac and pointed to a chair. "Sit. I will get water and bandages." Isaac obeyed, too tired to argue. Victoria helped him remove his vest and shirt, trying not to stare at the broad expanse of his chest, all hard muscle and scattered scars. There were fresh cuts and bruises from the mine, and Margaret cleaned them efficiently while Victoria held the lamp. "You did a good thing tonight," Margaret said. "Those families owe you everything. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Victoria said firmly. "Not anyone. You." When Margaret was done, she handed Isaac a clean shirt that had belonged to her late husband. It was a bit small across the shoulders, but it would do. "You will sleep in the spare room upstairs," Margaret said, "and I do not want to hear any argument about it." Isaac smiled slightly. "Yes, madam." He could barely climb the stairs, and Victoria stayed close, ready to catch him if he stumbled. The spare room was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a single window. Isaac sat on the edge of the bed and looked up at her. "Thank you, Victoria. You saved my life. The least I can do is make sure you have a safe place to sleep." "It is more than that." His hand reached out and took hers, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You were worried about me." "Of course I was worried. I care what happens to you." "Why?" The question was blunt, and it demanded an honest answer. Victoria took a breath. "Because I cannot stop thinking about you. Because when you ride away, part of me goes with you. Because you are the bravest, kindest, most stubborn man I have ever met. And I do not want to lose you." Isaac stood slowly, and suddenly they were very close. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. "I have thought about you every day since I left you here," he said quietly. "I told myself to stay away, that you deserve better than a man who lives like I do. But I cannot seem to make myself care about what you deserve when all I want is to be near you." "Then be near me," Victoria whispered. "Do not stay away." He leaned down and she rose on her toes, and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle at first, tentative, then deepened with a hunger that took them both by surprise. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she melted into him, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair. He tasted like dust and smoke and something uniquely him, and she never wanted it to end. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "This is not what I planned," he said. "Plans change. I do not know how to do this, Victoria. I have been alone for so long. Then we will figure it out together." He kissed her again, slower this time, and Victoria felt like she was falling. But for once, she did not care about the landing. A discreet cough from the doorway made them spring apart. Margaret stood there, trying not to smile. "I will pretend I did not see that," she said. "But Isaac needs rest, and so do you, Victoria. There will be time for everything else later." Victoria felt her face burn with embarrassment, but Isaac just laughed, a low, warm sound that she had never heard from him before. "Yes, madam," he said again. Victoria reluctantly left the room, pausing at the door to look back at him. He was watching her with an expression that made her heart race. "Good night, Isaac." "Good night, Victoria." She lay in her bed wide awake, replaying the kiss over and over in her mind. Everything had changed tonight, and she could not wait to see what came next. Isaac stayed in Utica for 3 days, recovering from his ordeal in the mine. He spent most of his time at the store, ostensibly helping with heavy lifting and repairs, but Victoria knew he was there for her. They stole moments together whenever they could, conversations that stretched long into the evening, walks through the town after the store closed, kisses in shadowed corners that left her breathless. She learned about his childhood in Ohio, how he had lost his parents to cholera when he was 14, how he had joined the army at 16 to survive. He told her about the war, though not in detail, and she saw the shadows in his eyes when he spoke of it. She told him about her life in Boston, about feeling trapped and restless, about the relief of finally breaking free. "Do you regret coming west?" he asked her one evening as they sat on the porch behind the store, watching the stars come out. "Not for a single second. Especially not now." He smiled and pulled her closer, his arm around her shoulders. I should go back to my cabin soon. I need to check my trap lines. How long will you be gone? A few weeks, maybe a month. But I will come back, Victoria, I promise. Can I write to you? There is no post where I am, but when I come down you can give me all the letters you wrote, and I will read them by the fire. She leaned into him, breathing in his scent of pine and leather. I will miss you. Not as much as I will miss you. When he left the next morning, Victoria stood in the street and watched him ride away, her heart heavy but hopeful. He turned in the saddle and looked back at her, and the promise in that look sustained her through the long days that followed. She did write to him, long letters that she kept in a box under her bed, telling him about the store, about the people in town, about her growing love for this wild, beautiful place. And she thought about him constantly, counting the days until he would return. 4 weeks passed. 5. 6. Victoria began to worry. Margaret tried to reassure her that it was normal for trappers to stay in the mountains longer than expected, but Victoria could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then, in late October, a trapper came through town and stopped at the store for supplies. Victoria served him, and when he mentioned he had been up in the high country, she could not help herself. "Did you by any chance see Isaac Rowland?" The man's face darkened. "I did, about 2 weeks back. He was holed up in his cabin, sick with fever. I offered to bring him down to town, but he refused. Stubborn as a mule, that one." Victoria felt ice slide down her spine. Fever? How bad was it? Bad enough that he could barely stand. I left him what medicine I had, but I do not know if it was enough. I'm sorry, miss. Victoria did not remember making the decision. One moment she was standing behind the counter. The next she was grabbing her cloak and telling Margaret she was going after him. "Victoria, you cannot go up into those mountains alone," Margaret protested. "It is too dangerous. I am not leaving him up there to die. Can you tell me how to find his cabin?" "I have never been there, but I know the general area. You would need a guide." "Then I will find one." It took her 2 hours to convince someone to take her. Most of the men in town thought she was crazy. But finally an old prospector named Jim agreed, partly because he owed Isaac a favor and partly because he admired her determination. They set out at dawn the next morning, Victoria riding a horse borrowed from the livery, Jim on his mule. The journey was grueling. They climbed higher into the mountains, following narrow trails that terrified Victoria with their steep drops and loose rocks. The air grew thinner and colder, and snow began to appear on the ground. "His cabin is up near Elk Ridge," Jim said. "Maybe another 2 hours." Victoria gritted her teeth and kept going. Her hands were numb despite her gloves, and her face stung from the cold wind. But she did not care. She had to reach Isaac. When they finally emerged into a clearing and she saw the cabin, her heart nearly stopped. It was a solid structure, built of logs and tucked against a rocky hillside, with a stone chimney and a small porch. But there was no smoke coming from the chimney, and the door was standing slightly ajar. Victoria dismounted and ran to the cabin, ignoring Jim's call to be careful. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The cabin was dim and cold. There was a fireplace with dead ashes in it, a rough table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and in the corner, on a bed covered with furs, lay Isaac. "Isaac!" She rushed to him, dropping to her knees beside the bed. He was deathly pale, his skin burning with fever, his breathing shallow. "Isaac, can you hear me?" His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Victoria?" His voice was a raspy whisper. "Am I dreaming?" "No, you're not dreaming. I'm here. I'm really here. You should not have come. Too dangerous. Hush, save your strength." Jim came in behind her, took one look at Isaac, and immediately set about building a fire. "He needs warmth and fluids. Do you know anything about nursing?" "I will learn." Victoria pulled off her cloak and gloves, rolling up her sleeves. "Tell me what to do." For the next 2 days, Victoria barely left Isaac's side. She kept the fire burning, heated water to bathe his face and chest, forced him to drink when he was conscious enough to swallow. Jim stayed long enough to make sure they had enough wood and supplies, then headed back to town, promising to return in a week to check on them. It was the longest, most terrifying 2 days of Victoria's life. Isaac's fever spiked and fell, and there were hours when she was certain she would lose him. She prayed, though she had not prayed in years, and she talked to him constantly, telling him he had to fight, had to come back to her. On the 3rd morning, his fever broke. Victoria woke from a doze in the chair beside his bed to find him looking at her with clear eyes. Victoria. Isaac. She reached for his hand, tears streaming down her face. You're back. Thank God you're back. You stayed. Of course I stayed. Did you think I would leave you? He tried to sit up and she helped him, propping pillows behind his back. He was weak, terribly weak, but the worst of the danger had passed. You came up here for me, he said, wonder in his voice. You risked your life. You saved mine. Twice now, if you count pulling me from the fire and making me realize what I want from life. I was not going to let you die in this cabin alone. I do not deserve you. You do not get to decide that. I do, and I choose you, Isaac Rowland. I choose you today and every day for the rest of my life, if you will have me. He reached up and cupped her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. I love you, Victoria Sinclair. I think I loved you from the moment I saw you in that burning stagecoach, fighting to survive. I tried to stay away, tried to tell myself it was impossible, but I cannot. I do not want to be without you. Then do not be. Marry me. Build a life with me. I do not care where we live or how we do it, as long as we are together. I live in a cabin in the mountains. It is a hard life. I do not care. You would give up the store, the town, everything you have built with your aunt? I would give up anything to be with you. But Isaac, I do not think I have to. You come to town every few months anyway. We could spend the winters in Utica, where it is safer, and the summers up here if you want. We could make it work. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. You have it all figured out, do you? Someone has to. You are clearly not capable of planning when you are too busy being stubborn and noble. He laughed, and then he pulled her down to kiss her, a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. Yes, he said against her lips, yes to everything, yes to you, always. Victoria spent the next week nursing Isaac back to strength. She cooked his food, cleaned his cabin, and explored the area around it when he was sleeping. The mountains were beautiful, harsh and unforgiving, but magnificent. She could see herself being happy here, at least part of the time. When Jim returned, Isaac was on his feet again, still weak but recovering. They made the journey back to Utica together, slower this time to accommodate Isaac's condition. Margaret cried when she saw them and immediately fussed over Isaac, insisting he stay in the spare room until he was fully recovered. And I suppose you will want to marry him, she said to Victoria with mock severity. I do, as soon as possible. I thought as much. Well, I cannot say I am surprised. You two were clearly meant for each other. They were married in November, in a simple ceremony at the small church in Utica. Half the town turned out to see the mountain man and the Boston girl tie the knot. And if some people thought it was an odd match, they kept their opinions to themselves. Victoria wore a dress that Margaret had helped her sew, a simple white cotton with lace at the collar, and Isaac wore new trousers and a clean shirt that actually fit him. He'd even trimmed his beard for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her with such tenderness that Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. This was what she had come west for, she realized. Not just freedom, but this. Love, real and true and hard won. They spent the winter in Utica, living in the rooms above the store and helping Margaret run the business. Isaac took odd jobs around town, fixing things and helping with heavy work, and quickly became a valued member of the community. It was strange for him at first, being around people so much, but Victoria could see him adjusting, opening up in small ways. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk for hours, sharing dreams and plans. Isaac taught her to shoot a rifle, to read animal tracks, to navigate by the stars. She taught him to read better, something he had never had the chance to learn properly as a child, and was surprised by how quickly he took to it. You would have been a scholar if you had been given the chance, she told him one evening as he puzzled over a book she had brought from Boston. Maybe in another life. In this one, I am happy being a mountain man married to the smartest woman in Montana. Flattery will get you everywhere. I'm counting on it. Their first night together as husband and wife had been both awkward and wonderful. Isaac was gentle, patient with her inexperience, and Victoria discovered that the passion between them was not limited to kissing. They learned each other's bodies slowly, taking their time, and by morning Victoria understood what all the poets had been trying to say about love. When spring came, they made the journey up to Isaac's cabin, now their cabin. Victoria brought her belongings, her books, and her few precious possessions, and set about making the place more of a home. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted a small garden near the cabin, and arranged their supplies with an efficiency that made Isaac shake his head in admiration. "You're transforming my rough camp into a real home," he said, watching her hang wildflowers in a jar on the table. "Our home," she corrected. "And yes, I am. Do you mind?" "Not even a little bit. I like seeing your touches everywhere. It makes it feel like you are a permanent part of this place." "I'm a permanent part of you. The place comes with the territory." They fell into a rhythm. Isaac checked his trap lines and hunted, and Victoria kept the cabin, preserved food for the winter, and sometimes went with him on shorter trips, learning the mountains that were now her home too. It was hard work, but she had never been happier. At night, they would lie together in the big bed Isaac had built, her head on his chest, his arms around her, and talk about everything and nothing. In late summer, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She told Isaac one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "Paint the mountains gold and crimson." "I am going to have a baby." Isaac went very still. "You are sure?" "As sure as I can be. I've missed my courses twice and I've been sick in the mornings. Margaret told me those were the signs." He turned to her and she was surprised to see tears in his eyes. "A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy about it?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I never thought I would have this. A wife, a child, a family. I thought I would grow old alone in these mountains, and then you came along and changed everything. We changed everything together." They returned to Utica for the winter earlier than planned, Isaac not wanting Victoria to be in the cabin when the snows came and made travel impossible. Margaret was overjoyed at the news of the baby and immediately set about preparing everything they would need. Victoria's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she found the waiting difficult. Isaac was attentive to the point of being overprotective, barely letting her lift anything heavy and fretting over her constantly. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one day when he had physically removed a box from her hands for the third time. "I know that, but I cannot help it. You are carrying the most precious thing in the world. You're going to be insufferable when the baby actually arrives." "Probably." Their son was born in March of 1879, on a snowy evening when the wind howled around the store and the midwife had to be fetched through drifts 3 feet deep. Isaac paced the floor downstairs, driving Margaret crazy, until finally the cry of a baby brought him running up the stairs. Victoria was exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Come meet your son." Isaac approached slowly, almost reverently. He looked down at the baby's red, wrinkled face and promptly fell completely in love. "He is perfect," he breathed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly but never settled on one. Now, looking at her husband holding their son with such tender care, Victoria knew. "Thomas," she said, "after Margaret's husband. It's a good, strong name." "Thomas Rowland." Isaac tested it out. "I like it. Welcome to the world, Thomas." The baby opened his eyes, dark blue like all newborns, and seemed to stare at his father. Isaac's face was filled with such love and wonder that Victoria felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I love you," she told him. "I love our family." "I love you too, more than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." They stayed in Utica through the spring, letting Victoria recover and giving Thomas a chance to grow stronger before they returned to the cabin. Isaac was a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring the baby to Victoria for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, singing rough lullabies in his deep voice that somehow always soothed Thomas when he was fussy. "You are a natural at this," Victoria told him one evening, watching him rock their son to sleep. "I am terrified every second that I will do something wrong. That is how you know you are doing it right. You care too much to be careless." When summer came, they made the trek back to the mountains. Victoria had fashioned a carrier that she could wear, keeping Thomas close against her chest as they traveled. The baby seemed to thrive in the mountain air, his cheeks growing round and pink, his eyes bright with curiosity. The years that followed were the happiest of Victoria's life. They maintained their pattern, summers in the mountains, winters in town. Thomas grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who loved following his father around and learning everything about the wilderness. When he was 3, Victoria found herself pregnant again, and their daughter, named Margaret after her great-aunt, was born in the spring of 1882. With 2 children, life became more chaotic but no less joyful. Maggie, as they called her, was different from her brother, more thoughtful and quiet, content to sit with her mother and learn letters while Thomas was off exploring with Isaac. Isaac's aunt, the original Margaret, remained a central part of their lives, doting on her great-niece and nephew and running the store with Victoria's help during the winters. She never remarried, claiming that she had her family and that was enough. As the children grew older, Victoria and Isaac began spending more time in Utica during the school year so that Thomas and Maggie could get a proper education. Isaac built them a small house on the edge of town, and they used it as a base while keeping the cabin for summer retreats. He had adjusted to town life more than he ever thought possible, though he was always happiest in the mountains. One evening when Thomas was 10 and Maggie was 7, the family sat on the porch of their Utica house, watching the stars come out. The children were arguing good-naturedly about whether they would go fishing or riding tomorrow, and Isaac had his arm around Victoria's shoulders. "Did you ever imagine this?" Victoria asked softly. "When you were alone in your cabin, did you imagine a family?" "Never. I did not let myself dream that big. I thought I would die up there alone, probably frozen in some winter storm, and that would be the end of it. Then you came along and showed me what life could be. We saved each other, I think. I was drowning in Boston, suffocating. You pulled me out of that fire in more ways than one. We make a good team. The best team." Thomas came over and climbed onto Isaac's lap, even though he was getting too big for it. "Papa, tell us the story again, about how you saved Mama from the burning stagecoach." Isaac glanced at Victoria, and she nodded, smiling. He had told this story 100 times, and the children never tired of it. "Well, it was a hot August day, and I was riding toward Helena when I saw smoke rising from the valley below." Victoria listened to him tell their story, watched their children's faces light up with excitement, even though they knew how it ended. She thought about that day, about how terrified she had been, trapped in the burning coach. She had thought her life was over. Instead, it had just been beginning. She reached over and took Isaac's hand, and he squeezed it, never pausing in his story. His voice was warm and steady, the same voice that had commanded her to take his hand all those years ago, the same voice that had told her he loved her, that had soothed their babies to sleep. After the children finally went to bed, Victoria and Isaac sat together under the stars for a while longer, not needing words. They had built something beautiful together, against all odds. A city girl and a mountain man, brought together by fate and fire, choosing each other every day. "No regrets?" Isaac asked, as he sometimes did. "Not a single one. You? Only that I did not find you sooner. We found each other exactly when we were meant to. I believe that." He pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Victoria Rowland. I love you too, Isaac. Forever." The years continued to unfold with a gentle rhythm that Victoria had never known in her restless Boston days. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, with the same dark hair and green eyes, and he had inherited Isaac's affinity for the wilderness. By the time he was 15, he could track a deer through the forest, skin a rabbit, and navigate by the stars as well as any grown man. But he had also inherited Victoria's love of learning, and he devoured every book she put in front of him. Maggie was quieter, but equally determined. She had her mother's honey-colored hair and her father's fierce stubbornness. She preferred the store to the mountains, showing a natural head for numbers and business that delighted Margaret and surprised Isaac. "She is going to run half of Montana someday," Isaac said one evening, watching Maggie efficiently organize a new shipment of supplies while correcting Thomas's arithmetic at the same time. "She gets that from me," Victoria said proudly, "and the stubbornness from you." "I am not stubborn. Isaac Rowland, you once walked 5 miles on a sprained ankle rather than admit you needed help. That was different. That was practical." Victoria just laughed and kissed him. Margaret Chambers passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1889 at the age of 69. She had lived long enough to see both of her great niece and nephew grow into fine young people, and she died content. Her will left the store to Victoria, along with a letter that made them both laugh and cry. "My dearest Victoria," it read, "I knew from the moment you stepped off that stagecoach, smoke-stained and stubborn-eyed, that you would be fine. And I knew the moment I saw Isaac Rowland carry you into my store that he was the man for you, even if you were both too proud to see it right away. You have built a beautiful life together, the kind of life that Thomas and I always dreamed of having. I am so proud of you, dear girl. Take care of each other, take care of those beautiful children, and never forget that love is the only thing that matters in the end. Your loving aunt, Margaret." Victoria wept when she read it, and Isaac held her, his own eyes suspiciously bright. They closed the store for a week in Margaret's honor, and half the town came to her funeral. She had been a fixture in Utica for 40 years, and everyone had a story about her kindness. After Margaret's death, Victoria and Isaac made a decision. They would keep the store, but they would let Maggie run it when she was old enough. Thomas, meanwhile, wanted to become a guide, leading hunting and exploration parties through the mountains he knew so well. It was not the life Victoria had imagined for her children when she was a girl in Boston, but it was a good life, an honest life, and she could not have been prouder of them both. The years rolled on. Thomas married a girl from Helena when he was 23, a spirited young woman named Lily, who could ride like the wind and shoot as straight as any man. They built a cabin not far from Isaac and Victoria's, and when their children came along, Isaac and Victoria found themselves grandparents. Maggie married at 25, a quiet young man named Daniel, who came to Utica to work at the assay office and fell instantly in love with the sharp-eyed woman who ran the general store. They took over the house in town, and Victoria and Isaac officially moved back to the mountains full-time. Isaac was in his 50s now, his dark hair streaked with silver, his beard fully gray. But he was still strong, still capable, still the man who had pulled Victoria from the fire all those years ago. And Victoria, now in her mid-40s, had a few silver threads of her own in her honey-colored hair, but her eyes were still bright, her mind still sharp. They would sit on the porch of their cabin in the evenings, watching the sun set over the peaks they had climbed together, and talk about everything and nothing. "Do you remember the first night I brought you here?" Isaac asked one evening. "After you came up to nurse me when I was sick?" "Of course I remember. I was terrified I would lose you. You barely knew me. I knew enough. I knew I loved you, even if I had not said it yet." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in the gesture that had become as familiar as breathing. "Best decision I ever made, falling in love with you. You did not decide. It just happened. Maybe. But I decided to keep loving you every day. That was a choice, and I have never regretted it. Sweet talker. Only with you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Victoria said, "Isaac, I want you to know something. These years with you, they have been the best of my life, better than I ever dreamed back in Boston when I was so desperate to escape. You gave me adventure and purpose and love, so much love. I could not have asked for anything more." He looked at her, his green eyes serious. "Why does this sound like a goodbye?" "It is not. I just want to make sure you know, in case I do not say it enough. You say it all the time, and I know. I have always known." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "We are not done yet, Victoria. We have years ahead of us. Promise me something. When our time comes, whenever that is, promise me you will not shut yourself away again. You have family now, children and grandchildren who love you. Stay with them." "I promise, but only if you promise me the same thing." "I promise." They kept their promises. Isaac lived to the age of 78, a remarkable age for a man who had lived as hard as he had. He was out checking the game trails one October morning when his heart simply gave out. Thomas found him later that day, sitting against a tree as if he had just stopped to rest, his face peaceful. It was the way he would have wanted to go, Victoria knew. In the mountains he loved, doing what he had always done. The grief was crushing at first. Victoria had lost partners before her parents, her Aunt Margaret, but nothing compared to losing Isaac. He had been her companion for over 40 years, the other half of her soul. But she kept her promise. She stayed with her children, dividing her time between Thomas's cabin and Maggie's house in Utica. She told her grandchildren stories about their grandfather, about the mountain man who had saved her from the fire, and then spent the rest of his life making sure she never had cause to regret it. And slowly, the grief softened into something gentler. She could remember Isaac with smiles instead of tears, could visit their cabin and feel his presence there, in the walls he had built, the porch where they had sat together, the bed where they had loved each other for so many years. Victoria Sinclair Rowland lived to the age of 86. She died in her sleep in the winter of 1943, surrounded by 3 generations of her family. Her last conscious thought was of Isaac and the certainty that she would see him again. At her funeral, her grandson Thomas's eldest son, named Isaac in honor of the grandfather he had adored, stood up to speak. He was a man of 45, with his grandfather's green eyes and his grandmother's sharp mind. My grandmother used to tell us a story, he said, his voice carrying through the small church in Utica, about how our grandfather saved her from a burning stagecoach when she was just a young woman newly arrived in Montana. She would describe how he pulled her through the window to safety, how he carried her away from the flames, how he gave her a new life in more ways than one. But what she did not always say, because she was modest, was that she saved him right back. He was a man alone, living in the wilderness, convinced he would die that way. And she showed him what it meant to have a family, to be loved, to belong somewhere. They saved each other, and in doing so, they built something that has lasted beyond their lifetimes. Every one of us here is proof of that. Every story we tell our children about courage and love and choosing each other every day, that is their legacy. So we say goodbye to Victoria Rowland today, but we carry her with us, and we carry Isaac with us, and we remember that sometimes the fire that seems like it will destroy you is actually the beginning of the best part of your life. They buried Victoria next to Isaac on a hillside overlooking Utica, with a view of the mountains they had loved. The headstones were simple, just their names and dates, but someone, Thomas, probably had carved a small addition at the bottom of each stone. On Isaac's, he pulled her from the fire. On Victoria's, she pulled him from the darkness, and between the 2 stones planted by their great-grandchildren, wildflowers grew every spring, bright and beautiful and enduring. The story of Isaac and Victoria became part of the fabric of Utica, told and retold through the generations. The details might have changed a little with each telling, but the heart of it remained the same. It was a story about courage and love, about 2 people from different worlds who found each other at exactly the right moment, about choosing to build a life together even when it seemed impossible. Young couples would visit their graves on their wedding days, asking for the same kind of lasting love. The cabin in the mountains was maintained by the family and eventually became a kind of shrine, a place where people could go to remember that true love was not just a story, it was real, and it was worth fighting for. The store in Utica, still run by Maggie's descendants, had a photograph on the wall behind the counter. It was taken in 1899 for Isaac and Victoria's 20th wedding anniversary. In it, Isaac stood tall and strong, his arm around Victoria, who looked up at him with an expression of such pure love that it made people's hearts ache. They were surrounded by their children, and even in the old, faded photograph, you could see the bond between them, the foundation they had built that nothing could shake. Historians who studied the settlement of Montana would sometimes come across the story of Isaac and Victoria. They would note the unusual nature of their meeting, the dramatic rescue from the burning stagecoach, the unlikely romance between the mountain man and the Boston lady. But what they could not fully capture in their books and papers was the everyday magic of it all. The thousands of small moments that made up a marriage, the morning coffees and evening conversations, the laughter and the tears, the hard work and the simple joys. The way they had looked at each other across the breakfast table after 40 years together and still seen the person they loved most in the world. That was the real story. Not just the fire and the rescue, though that was how it began, but everything that came after. The choosing, day after day, year after year. The building of a life, a family, a legacy. The love that endured. On the hillside where they were buried, the wildflowers bloomed every spring without fail, bright against the Montana sky. And if you stood there quietly, looking out at the mountains, you could almost imagine you heard them. Isaac's steady voice and Victoria's soft laughter carried on the wind that blew down from the high country. The sound of two souls who had found each other against all odds and who had held on tight all the way to the end and beyond. Their story had started with fire and fear, with Victoria trapped and terrified, with Isaac appearing like something out of a dream to pull her to safety. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a testament to the power of love, to the possibility of new beginnings, to the courage it took to let someone in and build something together. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the dramatic rescue, though that was part of it, but the 40-plus years that followed. The life they built together in the wild, beautiful Montana territory. The children they raised, the love they shared, the way they changed each other for the better and created something that lasted long after they were gone. Victoria had come west looking for freedom, for something more than the suffocating expectations of Boston society. She had found it, and so much more besides. She had found adventure and purpose and a love that transformed her entire life. And Isaac, who had resigned himself to solitude, had found that he could be part of something bigger than himself, that he could love and be loved in return, that his life could mean something beyond mere survival. They had been each other's rescue, each other's salvation, and that, in the end, was the truest part of the story. The stagecoach had been burning with her inside. The mountain man had pulled her through the window to safety. But they had saved each other, and they had kept saving each other every day for the rest of their lives. It was a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the Wild West, filled with drama and danger and everyday miracles. It was the kind of story that reminded people why they believed in love at all, why they took chances on each other, why they held on even when things got difficult. Because sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found the person who made everything make sense, the person who saw you, really saw you, and loved you anyway, the person who would pull you from the fire and whom you would follow into the mountains and with whom you would build something that outlasted both of you. That was the legacy of Isaac and Victoria Rowland, not just the dramatic beginning, but the beautiful, difficult, wonderful middle and end. The whole story, complete and perfect and entirely their own. And on the hillside above Utica, Montana, the wildflowers bloomed, year after year after year, a living reminder that love, real love, was the kind of thing that never truly died. It just transformed, passing from generation to generation, a gift and a promise and a hope that everyone who heard the story carried with them. The mountain man and the lady from Boston. He pulled her from the flames, and she pulled him from the darkness, and together they built a love that would be remembered for as long as Montana had stories to tell.